I literally woke up at 3 a.m. with this video downloaded in my head, like the entire thing, and I knew immediately I could not do this video. We have to talk about this. It's so important. So many of us experience this as Asians, but it's just not talked about often, and it's really holding us back in so many ways. So part of what spurred this was this very interesting comment reply that I got on one of my comments on someone else's video about Asian American lives and childhoods. It just always like surprises me when other people don't understand at all the multifaceted struggles and layers and complexities when it comes to being Asian American, especially first or second generation. Like when I share about things that are just so normal to me and so almost like obvious, and other people who are not Asian will hear about it and will be like, wow, that is so interesting. I can't relate at all. It just always makes me think, wow, what is it like to be you and not go through these struggles? But I did find this comment really encouraging too, because it is awesome when other people who are not Asian are trying to understand more of the Asian experience and what it's like to be Asian. Some of my favorite testimonies from me and my husband's podcast, because we talk about this a lot on our podcast, are from people who are not Asian being like, wow, this is giving me more insights and understanding to really speak to and help and really love my Asian friends and those in my community who are from this background. I also love hearing when other people, again, who are not Asian but share similar struggles or experiences or tensions, and it just really shows that there's way more that connects us and divides us as human beings. And so I felt compelled to make this video not just because I had this like divine download at 3 a.m. but because I wanted to share with both people who can relate and cannot relate to this background, to really spur thoughts that I really feel like just would be helpful for everybody across the spectrum. So what I want to talk about today is why we don't see many Asian entrepreneurs. When I refer to entrepreneurs, I'm not talking about like the more traditional family-based physical type of businesses like restaurants and laundromats, nail salons, things like that are more like stereotypical Asian, but I'm talking more about the creative entrepreneurship online or in content creation or podcasting or social media or right here on YouTube. And what really came to mind were these 4 big barriers to creative entrepreneurship are really relevant and prevalent to Asians and Asian Americans, but probably also some of you from other backgrounds as well. So number 1 is this cultural norm to keep your head down. There's this phrase from a traditional Asian culture, which is don't rock the boat. Like you don't want to stand out. You just want to follow orders and be a quote unquote good person or citizen by doing what you're told. In fact, I remember my mom would share stories from her childhood where in school, if you asked the teacher a question or if you challenged what was being taught, you would get severely punished, both physically but also emotionally humiliated. And a lot of this does actually tie in with a really good value of collectivism, like thinking in terms of a collective group of people and what is best for the group instead of yourself. But I feel like it's the same thing with Western individualization. It's not good to take either one to an extreme. And so because this like don't rock the boat mentality is so deeply ingrained in our generations of cultural indoctrination, basically, it's really no wonder why it's hard for many Asians to speak up in meetings, to voice their opinions, and to really do things that seem like it's swimming against the current. This is also tied with the second barrier, which is saving face. Pretty much every Asian knows this term because it basically permeates through your entire family heritage and culture. There's a big emphasis on not embarrassing yourself, because if you embarrass yourself, you pretty much bring dishonor to your whole family, just like that quote in Mulan. And so a lot of Asians feel this pressure to really perform and ensure success in whatever we do. If it doesn't look likely to be successful, then don't even bother, because you don't want that shame upon yourself and upon your family, because if you do, you basically feel like the black sheep, the burden, the one bringing your family down, being a disappointment and not being validated and approved of, which also takes away from your sense of worth and identity and value. It is really deep on many levels. And this literally goes against everything in creative entrepreneurship, because you have to be willing to put yourself out there even when you're starting small, even when you have nothing to show or prove that it's going to be successful. And I would argue it's inevitable to fail, because that's really the only way you can grow and succeed in the long run. I've been thinking a lot about how this journey of content creation, creative entrepreneurship is just like riding a bike. No one would expect themselves to immediately know how to ride a bicycle without ever trying it before. Typically, you expect to fall down a couple times at least and get some scrapes on your knees. But over time, the more you practice, the more confident you become and the more experienced you are, and the fear slowly gets stripped away. Same thing with cooking cooking or baking, inevitably when you're a beginner, you make mistakes. You accidentally confuse a teaspoon with a tablespoon, baking soda with baking powder. This has definitely not happened to me before. You burn a couple things, including some of your fingers. But again, that's exactly how you learn and grow. But with creative entrepreneurship is that, but magnified, because you can't hide it in private. People actually will see you put yourself out there and be prone to criticism, judgment, hate, failures, mistakes. And it's really this inevitable part of the journey that you just have to push through. The third barrier is a very high value in traditional Asian culture on filial piety, which is really rooted in Confucianism, and it means putting a really high value on respecting your elders to the point of obeying what they tell you to do. Again, it goes back to number 1 and number 2. Save face, don't rock the boat, just do what you're told, and submit to your elders to the point of not questioning what they tell you. You just do what you're told out of duty and quote unquote respect and honor. The problem is when this is taken to an extreme, it breeds resentment, a lack of sense of self, and really living on autopilot. Like, you're not living an authentic life according to you, you're living according to other people's expectations. This is a very common tension amongst children of immigrants because there's both a generational and cultural gap where values are completely different. And so as Asian Americans, even though in our households there is this very high value for filial piety, growing up in a Western culture, we're encouraged to be ourselves and live out our individual unique purpose. Again, neither individualism or collectivism is healthy to an extreme, but I think it says a lot just knowing that the number one most common regret of those dying on their deathbeds is that people wish that they had had the courage to live the life authentic to themselves, not the life that others expected of them. And it really has been this lifelong ongoing journey for both me and my husband to navigate this really delicate balance and tension of both honoring, loving, respecting our family members, especially parents, while at the same time knowing that that does not equate with necessarily obeying everything they want us to do according to what they think is best, but instead really prioritizing what we believe God has uniquely called and created us for, both individually and as a couple. And I believe the fourth biggest barrier really comes down to emotional unawareness and disconnection. So in traditional Asian culture, being aware and connected with your emotions, let alone talking about it out loud, is basically non-existent, or is really, really, really rare. And this really connects with everything else I talked about, because basically the less you're aware of your own needs and emotions, the easier it is to fit in and just do what you're told. But this basically perpetuates the cycle of not taking risks, of not putting yourself out there, of not doing anything that would be considered weird or risk being judged by others. And again, this is really what entrepreneurship forces you to do if you really want to grow, both in your endeavors but also as a person. And so as an Asian person, there are just so many reasons not to pursue entrepreneurship, so why should we even bother? It feels much more comfortable to just follow the conventional paths of what's commonly accepted or what would get you approval from your family. And this is where I believe, at least for me and my husband, faith really plays a big role, because we believe that even though God did make us for community to be interdependent with other people, he also made us individually with a unique purpose and design, with specific gifts, passions, and purposes for our lives. On top of that, God has really been speaking to me this week through the story of Moses, and it just really shook me. There's a lot to unpack in it, but one of my big takeaways came from comparing Moses in Exodus 3 at his burning bush moment when he was first called by God to Exodus 33 when Moses has already been leading the Israelites in the wilderness for many decades, and now he's much more seasoned, experienced, close with God, and he's just really grown and evolved as both a person and a leader. So at the burning bush in Exodus 3, when God calls him to go back to Egypt to free the Israelites and bring them into the promised land, that seems like a really daunting task, and Moses is like, please don't pick me. He pushes back against God so many times. He questions, how will people even believe me or listen to me? I can't speak well. A lot of his concerns are actually very self-focused. Fast forward, it is so amazing how far Moses has come when the Israelites sinned a great sin against God and made their own golden calf to worship and bow down to. Despite everything God had miraculously done for them, from splitting the Red Sea to providing manna from the sky, and Moses goes to God and humbly pleads for God's forgiveness on behalf of the Israelites, to the point where he's telling God, blot my name out of your book of life, and basically having this willingness to atone for all those people's sins, even though they did not deserve it at all. And in fact, it says that Moses' anger burned hot. And it's amazing just to see how Moses now prioritizes the people's welfare and good above even his own name being in God's book of life. Thankfully, we see God have mercy and grace, and he doesn't do this to Moses, but I'm just sharing this example because it really also reflects the same sacrificial leadership that we see in the Apostle Paul, the disciples, and Jesus himself. And why I bring this up is because I believe, and I've been learning this for myself, that true kingdom entrepreneurship according to God's design is also similar to true biblical leadership that we see all over scripture. It's much easier to self-preserve, to hide in our insecurities, to just stay comfortable and do what's convenient for us, to shy away from the spotlight and not open ourselves to criticism or failure or risking failure. But as someone who's seen over and over again that living according to God's design is what brings the most thriving, the most peace and joy and alignment, I've been starting to really understand more and more that pushing through, that sacrificing is really worth it for the very sake of the people I'm called to serve and impact, regardless of whether or not I get human recognition for it, because God sees and God's opinion is the one that actually really matters. And so for my fellow Asians and Asian Americans, there's definitely a really deeply ingrained cultural stronghold, I would say, that keeps us in these cycles and patterns of playing it safe and not taking risks. And if you ever feel that tension inside of you where you want to branch out, you want to do something new, but you're feeling afraid, I just want to validate that that is so common and it's not your fault. It's just a natural byproduct of generations ahead of you thinking and operating in this way, and it's basically how you were programmed growing up. But my hope is that this video would start to get you thinking and help you become more aware of these barriers internally so that you don't end up living on autopilot and regretting it on your deathbed. Personally, I think it'd also be so cool to look back on this video one day and just appreciate how far I've come, kind of like Moses in Exodus 3 verses 33, and just see, how much God has grown me and molded me. And I hope that it really becomes even more proof and evidence and even more powerful testimony to people to really go after the things that God has put on their hearts, regardless of the personal cost, inconvenience, and hardship. There's a lot more I think we could talk about, but I would love to hear from you. If you come from an Asian background, which mindset barriers do you relate with, or are there more that I didn't mention? Please share in the comments below. I think it would help all of us really continue this conversation and help us all to grow and break through those barriers. And if you're not Asian, thanks so much still for being here, for being an ally and advocate of our community. And I would be really curious to know what stood out as surprising or eye-opening for you. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.